What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Stacking the Box College Football Edition. I'm your host, Reed Wallach, joined as always every Tuesday, Cody Williams. We are here to walk you through the final rankings reveal before the real rankings reveal. That is, of course, the Tuesday night college football playoff selection updated rankings. We're going to walk through that. We're going to get you ready for conference championship week, try and get you ready with all the scenarios and permutations that have went from what seemed like thousands a few weeks ago to just a few as we sit here on the final week before the college football playoff bracket is revealed. Cody, busy week last week. I hope you had a good Thanksgiving. How's it going?
Hope you had a good one too, man. It was, it was a fun post Thanksgiving. College football got wild. We had 8 overtimes on Black Friday with Georgia. Then we had, Ryan Day turtling up against Michigan for the 4th straight year, almost a half decade's worth we're at now. It was a fun weekend, man, and I think we're in for another fun one as well.
Yeah, great slate of games last week to cap off the regular season. We now move into the business side of things here. We got some trophies to hand out. We got some brackets to give out. We got ready for the postseason, all that comes with college football. So let's waste no time. Let's get to our updated brackets. And I kind of went a little bit more like I looked at my bracket from last week, and obviously a lot of things changed. And I was like, I'm going to start from scratch here, and I'm going to make it look how I believe. I went more towards what I think the committee is going to do rather than what I believe, which I kind of was doing that early on. Like, this is like, I know it was kind of knocking down Notre Dame and stuff for that loss to Northern Illinois, but I feel like now we're a week away. I'm going to reset. I'm going to try and get like almost what I think they're going to do more than what I believe.
Yeah, and that's what I've been trying to operate just on a week-to-week basis. Like, this is what I think the committee is going to look like tonight. Like, or on Tuesday night. I don't think it's going, like, this is necessarily what it's going to look like come Saturday, because I think, excuse me, come Sunday after Saturday, because, like, there's some results that could change some things in a pretty major way.
Yeah, so let's motor through this, because I do think that what's going to happen is the more interesting part of all of this. And I think there's a few takeaways that I think we're going to have after we get through our bracket. So let's start. I think we're going to have the same as we've had this entire time. Number 1 is Oregon, the only undefeated team left in the country. Yep. Number 2 is Texas.
Correct.
Number 3 is SMU.
Damn right it is. Go pony up.
And then number 4, which I believe this is where we've deviated. I still have Arizona State here. I'm going to guess you have Boise State.
I do have Boise State, but again, that is based on what I think is going to happen on Tuesday night. I think that if Arizona State wins the Big 12 championship, then I think there's a really good chance that they jump ahead of Boise State if Boise State holds serve.
That's where I'm leaning with here, so maybe that's where we deviate at the end, but we'll get there. I don't think there's much it's more of I think the win over Iowa State in the Big 12 championship game, and not to mention the way Arizona State has been playing down the stretch. Yeah. I do think there's cause for them to continue moving up the ladder. You also factor in like this coming week, Iowa State's going to be ranked. UNLV is going to be ranked probably both in like the 20-ish range. Maybe they bump them up a little bit to add some more juice to this weekend. But if both favorites win, keep in mind, Arizona State would win on a neutral field at AT&T Stadium, whereas Boise State would win at home. Just something to keep in mind as we get ready for this final week. But so number 5, I went with Notre Dame.
Okay, that's who I also have at number 5, because they're sitting pretty, man. It's good. It's a good week to be Notre Dame.
I also think this gives the opportunity for who I have 6 and 7. If they're both playing this weekend, if they're both to win, there's an easy move up rather than moving them down, I think, which I think we've seen the committee try to position themselves where, okay, we'll reward you if you win and we'll demote you if you lose. But I think it's more like if you win this weekend, you got to jump Notre Dame and you get that 5 seed or beyond. So I think that Notre Dame at 5 makes sense. To me, number 6, I went with Penn State.
Yeah, I'm with you there. But I think Penn State is potentially the most volatile of the teams that are playing in conference championships this weekend that are already going to be in the top 12 on Tuesday night. Because if Penn State goes out and gets walloped by Oregon, that's now 2 big games you played and 2 big games you've lost. And you start to look at their strength of schedule, their strength of record, and it's just really not commiserate with these other teams that are going to be in that mix with them.
So I'm going to circle back to my thought on Penn State at 6 when we get through the 10 seed, because I have a thought here. But I agree. I think also, I know, so Penn State was ranked ahead of Georgia last week, and that was kind of where I went with this. And in a way, I moved Notre Dame up even further because Penn State's only loss to Ohio State also kind of takes a ding now with Ohio State losing. So I thought it's almost like keep Penn State ahead of Georgia, who didn't look so great anyway against Georgia Tech, and then just move Notre Dame to the front of the line. So that was my thought there with Georgia at 7. Obviously, Penn State plays Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. Georgia plays Texas in the SEC championship game. So much, lot to be determined in, ironically, seeds 1, 2, 5, 6, 7. So it's more about the ordering of those 5 teams. One question on Georgia. Because if you did stay up and watch the Friday overtime matchup against Georgia Tech, Joe Tessitore made it very clear that if Georgia won, they had locked up a college football playoff berth. So I'm curious, do you think it is done? There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Georgia is in the playoff.
I think things have broken perfectly for that to be the case, because it's a rematch with Texas and you won the first meeting. And I think the fact that it would be just evening up the season series between these two, I think really, really works in Georgia's favor. I think if it was Texas A&M in this game, in the SEC championship game, then we'd be having a really different conversation about Georgia, because that's a substantially worse loss and it's a team you haven't played yet. And your third loss would be, worse, quite frankly.
And also Texas being in the field, it's not like A&M would be stealing someone's spot. It would be Texas, like a team already in. Okay, so
do you agree with that? Do you agree with that?
I think that makes sense. Okay. I think Georgia's going to get in no matter what. I guess like if you get blown out really badly, but I agree with you that the way the rest of the field is breaking, I just don't see them being left out of the field, because if you want to go through the SEC teams that can pass them, like does Alabama and Ole Miss get brought into play? Again, this is just like my overall, and we're going to talk about it at the end. It's my overall issue with, I don't see, barring you getting just absolutely demolished or an injury or something, I just don't really understand the point of all this. If you're going to make your championship game and have an extra game, why would you even bother playing? Like, you should almost forfeit if that's the case. Like, it makes it really, it's not fair, because you can't confidently say Alabama, South Carolina, or Ole Miss wouldn't also get smoked in that same game. You know what I mean? So that's where I struggle with the teams this weekend playing, being left out. Obviously, some different circumstances. Georgia doesn't fall into that, in my opinion.
No, I'm right there with you. And I also think, like, if you talk about Alabama specifically, like Georgia, even if they were to lose to Texas in the SEC championship game, that's still 3 quality losses. All 3 losses were against top 15 teams. And whereas Alabama has the Oklahoma loss and the Vanderbilt loss working against them. So, like, the resume still favor Georgia in that scenario.
I agree. Number 8, I went with Tennessee.
That's who I have as well. So we're spot on with through these 5 through 8 right now.
One thought on Tennessee. I've mentioned it to you on the show in the past. Things are starting to click a little bit for the Vols. They spotted Vanderbilt a big lead early, opening kickoff return, early fumble. They won that game pretty handily. And, I've been banging the drum for the Vols all year. And just if the bracket, I think, especially if you're going to see 3 and 4 be obviously the ACC and / Big 12 G5, some of these teams in the 6 through 11 range, like that might be the sweet spot, which is what I'm kind of hinting towards the end of when we get through this bracket. Tennessee, things might be starting to shape up their way. They're playing good ball right now.
Let me ask you this, because this kind of pertains to that. Do you have Ohio State at 9?
I do.
So that's what I want to talk about, because you talk about the bracket breaking right. I think that might actually be the bracket breaking right for Tennessee. If they're hosting Ohio State with Ohio State's offensive line issues, and we know what Tennessee's defensive front is capable of, I think they can really limit that Ohio State offense. And then, like you said, with Nico starting to really, I think, show some flashes that we had been waiting for most of the season over the past few weeks. And we know Dylan Sampson's fantastic as well. I think that Tennessee can cause Ohio State a lot of problems.
Absolutely. The only issue with drawing out the whole thing is that they would then play number 1 Oregon. Whereas I think, again, we're now tinkering with the bracket a little too much. But if this was instead like the 6-11 matchup where they get like SMU, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well now Tennessee is small favorite at SMU in that game. Like things kind of open up where like a team like Notre Dame that's played themselves up the bracket, but not just up the bracket, but on the other side of the Big Ten and SEC champion, like Notre Dame, all of a sudden, a team that I think we both had questions about their overall ceiling. All of a sudden, things are like the brackets, like that's, I can't really make a call on who I think is going to win the national championship and who I think the championship game is going to be because the bracket's so up in the air still. But it does seem like as we get closer to the final one, it looks like Notre Dame has really positioned themselves to be on the other side of these heavyweights.
No, 100%. I mean, you think about it, Notre Dame could have the easiest path to a semifinal.
Yes.
Like that could be if they do end up as the 5 seed, which is very much in play still, like you get the 12 seed.
We have it in this bracket right now.
Yeah, exactly. And so like if that holds, like you're playing either the Big 12 champion or the G5 champion, which you're favored in those in both of those games if you're Notre Dame, and then you're playing the other one in the next round in the quarterfinals. So like you're set up really advantageously if you're Notre Dame. Now what happens in the semifinals and beyond? I'm still a little concerned about the Irish there, but I mean if you're the Irish, you're in a very, very good spot right now.
So number 10, I went Indiana.
That's who I have as well.
Because you got to drop Ohio State down, but you can't drop them past Indiana because they beat Indiana obviously 2 weeks ago. So I think that made a lot of sense. And so I was mentioning why I had Penn State at 6, maybe ahead of Georgia. These 4, Georgia, Tennessee, Ohio State, Indiana, if these 4 are going to be in that 7 to 10 bracket, I believe, this is me hypothesizing, I believe that the committee would err on the side of let's have the SEC and Big Ten face off rather than let's have the 2 conference foes meet again in a rematch in the first round. I don't even know if that's in writing, but I feel like we're going to see the committee try to split up the conference rematches, like push that off to the side. You see it in the NCAA tournament in the first round as well. I believe the first 2 rounds. So I do think that's going to come, like the matchups are going to play a role once you get the 12 teams.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you on that. Like, I think that as much as we don't want to admit it, there's some gaming the system that the committee does.
Absolutely.
And like avoiding rematches, like if you're talking about this being a TV product and them wanting to get the best TV product on the field for the college football playoff, rematches is not the way to do that, especially in the first round.
Yeah. So I think that was part of when, like, I was writing this all out. I was like, I don't really see a conference rematch in the first round unless like it had to be and it made no sense. But like in this, I feel like it's kind of slides in pretty nicely where you have Georgia ahead of Tennessee, you have Ohio State ahead of Indiana, and that is your 2 matchups in the 7, 10, 8, 9. All right. So number 11, I had Boise State.
Okay. You bring in Boise. So I have Arizona State because like I said, I'm trying to do what they're going to have.
We basically have the same thing flipped.
Yeah, but I have Arizona State at 12. I still have them as the 12 seed. I think
so who do you have at 11?
So at 11, I have South Carolina.
Okay.
I think the committee is going to value that Clemson win. I don't value the Clemson win. I don't think Clemson's that good. But I think that the committee is going to value that Clemson win. And then on top of that, when you look at the way that the rankings have been shaking out, I do think that quality losses matter quite a bit. And all 3 of South Carolina's losses are quality losses, as opposed to, like I just mentioned, Alabama has 2 bad losses. Ole Miss has 2 bad losses. So when you start to weigh these things with one another, I do think that we see South Carolina get a push here.
So, okay, well, so 11 I had Boise, 12 I had Alabama.
Okay.
Which would set up a pretty, epic first round matchup in South Bend between Notre Dame and Alabama, which let me tell you my thought that I find so interesting, and then we'll go back to like deciphering out the bottom of this bracket. But I just find it funny that for so long this season, everyone's like, well, if you're the 5 seed, you're on the road to get, or you play so-and-so, and then you get like the G5 team, and then you get the worst 4 seed, and then you're off to the races. Now, all of a sudden, you draw Alabama instead of a G5 team, and everything changes for you. I just think it's very funny how that worked out in this, at least in my simulation and how I'm doing the bracket this week. But I was always pro, like, get the bye. I was never like, oh, like if you want to lose the 1 seed to get the easier path. I was like, I don't know. Guys could blow their knee out on any play against any team. It doesn't really matter. And this is like uncharted territory in terms of games played. So I was always pro get the bye when you can, but I also think it's funny that the 5 seed, like the desirable number, has quickly become like the, oh my God, we might play Jalen Milroe in Alabama in the first round. Like, to me, the sweet spot is quickly becoming like the 6 seed. That's where like you're starting to see, like, that's where it just, you can't play this stuff too far in advance. But anyway.
No, 6, 7 seed, I really do think is the sweet spot, because like, I'm as much as I love watching Indiana this year, like if you're Georgia or Tennessee and you have the chance that you're going to play Indiana in your first round matchup in your house, like that's what you want. And then you're probably going to either be playing the ACC champion or the Big 12 champion in the second round. So like,
which like we love those teams, but there's clearly a downgrade from like the 1 and 2 and the 3 and 4. So 100% agree with you. So let's talk South Carolina, Alabama. Before we do that, do you see any world where Ole Miss gets in?
I do not. I really don't.
Cool. I don't either. So we could just like I just wanted to give them their. So the only way Ole Miss gets in is if all of a sudden they really value that South Carolina lost to Ole Miss in Columbia. My issue with that is it's like a round robin effect where, okay, if you want to value Ole Miss's win against South Carolina, you also need to value Alabama's win against South Carolina. And then you start going down the line. And to me, Alabama's resume stacks up much better than Ole Miss's. So, like if you want to disqualify South Carolina and then do Alabama versus Ole Miss, Alabama trumps Ole Miss.
Agreed. 100%.
And then if you want to do the full resume, South Carolina trumps Ole Miss. So, you know, like, Ole Miss loses both head-to-heads, in my opinion.
No, and I agree with that completely. And I also think, like, if we're just like, I think we're at a point in the season, and I think people sometimes overvalue this, and hopefully the committee does not. But when you're talking about head-to-head matchups, because obviously South Carolina has lost to both of these teams in the regular season, but at a certain point, head-to-head matchups, especially given where they happen in the season, they mean less and less, at least in my estimation. And like, especially the fact that the Alabama win over South Carolina was a 2-point win that South Carolina, frankly, probably should have won. And then on top of that, if we're going to value head-to-head so much, then why is Oklahoma not ahead of Alabama? Why is Vanderbilt not ahead of Alabama? Because at a certain point, when you start taking bad losses that aren't these ranked losses, I think the head-to-head becomes a little overvalued because it was just one game on one day.
I agree. So my issue, or not my issue, just where I see this going with Alabama and South Carolina I know South Carolina might have the resume, but it's not that South Carolina totally trumps Alabama's resume. That's where I'm getting at. That, to me, like if they're close enough, you have head-to-head between Alabama and South Carolina, where Alabama does have the win. So I agree with you that head-to-head isn't everything, but it's also not nothing.
Yeah, I agree.
And then I also, it's the white A on the red helmet, and that's what they do, and that's where I think this is. So,
no, and I go ahead.
No, because I kind of wanted to bring this to the next point of this whole puzzle. So you finished the South Carolina thing.
So I was just going to say, like, I also think like the other factor in this equation that producer Joanne is now bringing up in our behind the scenes chat, that South Carolina is hot right now, and I do think that matters. Like in terms of valuing teams, who's playing the best right now? I want the teams playing the best right now that are like deserving as well to be in the college football playoff. We saw that be valued last year with Jordan Travis and Florida State. Jordan Travis goes out, they're like, okay, Florida State's going to get smoked if we put them in this 4-team college football playoff, so we're going to leave them out. Whether that was right or wrong, that's what they did. So even if with new committee members, I do think that's in the cards, but I'm probably wish casting having South Carolina in this field, if I'm being completely honest. I think South Carolina is the more deserving team to be in the spot based on everything I value in the college football playoff. But the cynic in me does come around to the fact that, like you said, the wide A on the helmet is what the college football playoff committee wants, because I like South Carolina. I enjoy watching South Carolina football this season. Lenora Sellers is quickly rising up my favorite players in college football to watch right now. But at the end of the day, Alabama's going to draw better ratings, and that's what it's going to come down to.
100%. So we're doing the rankings right now, right? We're doing, this is how we see it before the conference championship game. So let's talk about how Alabama gets into the playoff, or South Carolina for that matter. It pretty much revolves around SMU Clemson game result, because how this all goes is SMU and Clemson play. SMU is currently a 2.5 point favorite. SMU is what we believe will be the 3 seed going into this week. Clemson, they were on the fringes. They lose to South Carolina, so they're out. But if Clemson does beat SMU, Clemson will take the ACC auto bid and be in, which then brings the discussion of, okay, who is the committee taking? A 2-loss SMU team that lacks a truly signature win, though they won't have a bad loss, or a 3-loss, for the time being, we'll say 3-loss SEC team. So we'll group them all together. I am a big proponent of you win your games and you do what's on your schedule and you should be rewarded for that. I also believe that, as I was saying before, SMU making the ACC championship game and then being penalized by losing the game, assuming they lose a competitive, let's say they lose by less than a touchdown to Clemson. To me, it'd be pretty unfair of the committee to penalize them going all the way from 3 to 13, in my opinion.
I completely agree. SMU should be a lock. They absolutely should be. And I'm using the word should very carefully right there, because I don't know if they are, but they absolutely should be, because you look at their resume. Yes, I'm with you that win the games in front of you. It's the same reason that Indiana is still in the field. Like, you win the games in front of you, you do so in impressive fashion. And you look back at some of the less impressive wins for SMU, they start to look a little bit better, because one of their closest wins was that overtime win over Duke, a Duke team that just finished 9-3. Shouts to Manny Diaz down there in Durham. My God. But this SMU team has just taken care of business. Their one loss was before they made a quarterback change, which, again, I do think the committee thinks about that type of stuff. So, if they're thinking about that, this is a different team than the one that lost to BYU. But again, that's still a ranked loss. You did not lose to an unranked opponent, which I don't know. And just everything SMU has done. And then on top of that, you're going into the conference championship game in the ACC undefeated in conference play. So you handled business better than anyone else in the entire conference to get to this point.
And I agree with you. So I just think it's interesting, because going through the early week, the talking heads and everything, and I see Tempe kids checking it and saying, I would put a lot of money on SMU not making the playoffs if they lose. So let's talk about the betting odds real quick. First of all, there's no right answer here at the moment. This is merely being moved by people betting on it. But Alabama, who had opened about a pick 'em on Sunday morning to make the playoff, -110 each way, give or take, they're now -260 to make the playoff. So there's been a lot of action flooding in at FanDuel on Alabama to make the playoff. To me, how I see it is Alabama's price to make the playoff should closely resemble SMU's odds to beat Clemson, in my opinion. Maybe a little bit there, because I find it interesting, because SMU's price to make the playoff is -230. Now, the two markets aren't necessarily tied together, but what they're telling you is that SMU, even if they don't win, is still very likely to get in, wouldn't completely flip their odds. And Alabama, no matter what, is very likely to get in. For that matter, South Carolina is viewed as a long shot to get in. They're 8-1, Cody, to make the playoff. So all that to say, it seems like action is pouring in on the committee doing the cynical thing and putting Alabama in no matter what. And that's probably going to come at the expense of SMU if they were to lose to Clemson. If SMU takes care of business, then it seems like it's going to be a pretty easy, hey, Alabama's got, I imagine, the 12 seed. I'm just going to slide them in there, let them kind of be the chaos agent.
No, 100%. But I also think that Tempe Kids brought up a point earlier in the comments that I do think is worthwhile. They said, so is Alabama rooting for Clemson to lose, or South Carolina rooting for them to win? And South Carolina rooting for them to win. And I do think that would definitely change the calculus of Alabama if Clemson were to win. If Clemson were to win decisively against SMU, that win for South Carolina starts to look even better.
So win by a little and just hope that the committee pulls the screw job.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know, man. I do think it's going to be very interesting. I've seen the odds. I know that South Carolina is a long shot, but I think that action that we're seeing come in on Alabama, I think it is the cynicism. But
yeah, no, absolutely.
If you want me to put the real
after what happened last year, 100%.
But if you want me to put the real tinfoil cap on and really get cynical on you, here we go. let's make FanDuel some money if we're ESPN. We know the betting markets are, or these betting companies like FanDuel and DraftKings, they have a little bit of hand in these leagues. I'm not saying they push buttons or anything like that. It's not rigged or anything like that. But hey, there's a case to be made for South Carolina. Let's throw FanDuel a bone and put South Carolina in, save some money on all the money that's coming in on Alabama.
I think a lot of what's driving this is what happened last year with Florida State and them seeing them do, and a very not obvious way to get them in, but it's like pretty binary. There's not like they're not really doing this chaos calculus, evil mastermind. It's pretty simple. They just take Alabama over SMU. I just wonder in the first year of this system if people are getting a little too excited about the potential of that, because I do think if the committee, which they have hinted that they're not going to penalize you for your conference championship game. They also say a million things and they don't stand by it. But I do think that Alabama, South Carolina, not as much, but Alabama in particular, they've shown you way too often now that this team might not be very good. Now, none of these teams are very good in my opinion, but I think
I agree with you there.
If this was a 2-loss Alabama or something, then I think there's a case, but we've now seen a few times now that this team has laid an egg on in a quarter of their games. Like it's a pretty big sample size.
No, 100%. And I think I've said it all year about Alabama. This team is the highest variance team in the country. And when you think about that translating to the playoffs, okay, you're talking about a quarter of their games they've laid an egg. Okay, you have to win 4 games to win a national championship in the college football playoff. Alabama has shown in a quarter of their games they're going to lay an egg. So the chances of them winning a national championship, I don't feel like they're there. Whereas I guess that's where I really come down with on South Carolina. And I never thought I'd be in this position saying what I'm about to say, but I think South Carolina winning a national championship is more realistic than Alabama if they were to get in. And I think that should be the point of the playoff.
I don't know about that.
Give me the counter argument, because you have one of the best defenses in the country, which I do think is very important in this process. You have the ability to slow down just about any offense you face, and then you have the same trump. Frankly, what I think is a very similar trump card to what Alabama has in Jalen Milroe with Lenora Sellers, who has progressed as a passer and is obviously super dangerous with his legs now that he's fully healthy.
Big game DeBoer, and I think Milroe's best. It's probably the best of any team. I
no
think
argument there.
Again, you got to win a handful of games now. It's not just one game, but I think the ceiling of Milroe with the coaching of DeBoer in a big game, I think those two have proven they can beat any of these teams on the right day. Whereas South Carolina,
what about 4 big games? What about 4 big games?
Well, South Carolina though, has South Carolina really? And South Carolina hasn't beaten a team in the field.
That's fair.
Excluding Clemson. As of the bracket we wrote out today, South Carolina hasn't beaten a team in the field. Alabama did beat Georgia.
And that's fair, but they also lost to a team in the field.
But South Carolina also hasn't beaten a team in the field and lost to a team in the field. So
that's true.
For me, South Carolina is very good. I don't know if they have national championship upside.
Okay, fair. But
what a playoff game, yeah. I think any of these teams can beat any of them.
I don't think either of these teams can win a national championship, quite frankly. I don't think Alabama can put 4 games together. I really don't in a college football playoff.
But it's more possible than South Carolina, in my opinion.
See, I push back because like I said, I think Alabama's variance is so great, whereas I think South Carolina is relatively consistent. We know what you're going to get from South Carolina. You're going to get a heavy dose of Rocket Sanders. You're going to get a heavy dose of Lenora Sellers running the ball, and you're going to get a great defensive effort. Alabama, you don't know what the hell Jalen Milroe is going to do on a given game. You don't know what that defense and that secondary are going to look like in a given game. I have a lot of questions about this Alabama team.
Okay. We'll see. And we will be back.
I mean, the Iron Bowl wasn't impressive. Did you watch the Iron Bowl? Because it wasn't that impressive.
No. But South Carolina nearly losing to Missouri the week before. We got to look at the whole resume here.
It's fair. It's fair.
We will be back next Tuesday to talk about the real bracket. We'll have all our teams in. South Carolina, Alabama might not even be in, so we might have nothing to talk about. But we will talk about the entire bracket next week and all the fallout that comes with it, as well as preview the playoff games. So before we move on to the conference championship picks for this week, as me and Cody are still in a dead heat. It's been like 4 weeks in a row. We've had the same exact record. Cody, why don't you tell us about our sponsor today?
Yeah, so it's Underdog Fantasy. Underdog is the best place to cash in on all your takes this football season. Which players are going off, which ones are ice cold. Make your entries in just a few taps and turn your sports opinions into real money. Join over 5 million fans already playing on our Underdog. With their pick'em game, you could win money by making entries with your favorite players. Underdog is the best place to play champions, so sign up and deposit now using promo code STACKINGTHEBOX, one word, to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. This week, looking on the Underdog Fantasy app, I really like Arizona State running back Cam Skattebo higher than 115.5 rushing yards. Yes, that's high in the Big 12 championship game, but he's the heart and soul of that Sun Devils offense, and he's been cooking, and I don't think he's going to stop this week. But download the app today, make your picks, and use the code STACKINGTHEBOX, one word, to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. Higher or lower, you make the call on Underdog. Must be 18 and over, 19 and over in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 and over in Colorado for some games, 21 and over in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado? Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342. In New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-8778-HOPE-NY. Or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. Underdog Fantasy. Let's get it.
Let's do it. Let's move on to our picks for this week. We're going to start Group of 5 championship games. So we got 5 Group of 5 games this weekend. Open season here, Cody. You go wherever you'd like. So give us one pick from the Group of 5 title games.
I went to the Sun Belt, and I'm going Marshall plus 5.5 as the underdog against Louisiana, the Raging Cajuns. I think Louisiana has thrived with their offense a little bit fraudulently. I'm not saying they're fraudulent. This is a good offense. This is a good football team. You don't get to the Sun Belt championship game not being a good football team. But they only played 2 teams that graded out in the top 4 of defensive grades in the Sun Belt this year, according to PFF, and that was Texas State and South Alabama. Coincidentally, they lost to South Alabama, and they only won by 6 against Texas State. Marshall has the best defensive grade in the Sun Belt and also one of the best pass rushers in the country. If you haven't watched Mike Green, go get your eyes on Mike Green. Dude is an absolute monster. 16 sacks on the season. I think he's able to slow down this passing attack a little bit. You look at Ben Woldridge's passing under pressure this season. It's been good, but I don't think they faced a pressure rate that Marshall's going to be able to throw at him. Meanwhile, I think the Raging Cajuns defense sets up for Marshall to be able to control this game. They've struggled really, really mightily against the run. They're 132nd in defensive success rate against the run this year. Marshall wants to run the ball both with the quarterback and in the backfield. They've got a stable of backs. No one on the team has over 200 carries this season. So I think we see Marshall really control this game and really take Louisiana's offense out of rhythm. Honestly, when I'm looking at this game, one of the comps that I came up with, which is very random, but I think in terms of the style of plays that we're going to see contrasting, the Georgia Tech-Miami game. When Georgia Tech was able to run the ball and really get Cam Ward and that Miami offense out of rhythm, I think we see Marshall do the same. I'm not sure if they win outright, but I think 5.5 is too many points.
Yeah, they're onto something with Braylon Braxton, leading rusher and leading passer now, and I think Louisiana, this team has been like the bane of my existence with some of these broad covers they've had. But worst rush defense in the country in terms of EPA per rush. So I think Marshall could be a good running dog here. Like you mentioned, the defensive line can maybe give some havoc here. Just something to keep an eye on. Charles Huff, head coach of Marshall, potentially taking the Southern Miss job. I'm not really sure why. Talk about a lateral move in conference like that, but I don't know. Just something.
I almost call that a downgrade, man. I don't know if that's even lateral.
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, I would lean with you on Marshall. I could see a case for the over in this one. Honestly, 2 teams that I don't think are all that great, to be quite honest with you. So,
no.
But it can't hurt to take the points in that one. I'm going to go to the MAC on Saturday afternoon. I'm going to lay the 2.5 with Miami, Ohio. trying to become the first team to go back-to-back since Northern Illinois in the early 2010s. The Red Hawks have found their stride, winners of 7 straight, and they have experience facing this Ohio team. They won 30-20 earlier this season in Oxford, and while, look, it's one game, you can improve from that and everything, but I think it's worth noting that Miami, Ohio shut down Ohio so badly that Parker Navarro, who's had a great season with Ohio, benched during the game. He only had 80 passing yards and 2 interceptions. This Ohio team, it's all based around the run. Navarro's made timely passes. Keep an eye on Camden Owen, their wide receiver, but Navarro still 10 to 10 touchdown interception ratio. So he's not a potent passer when he has to throw heavy. He's only thrown the ball more than 25 times in a game, 3 times this season. So if you're not able to establish the run, I think you're going to be really up against it against this sturdy Red Hawks defense. And on the other side, we've seen Mozzie, the running back for the Red Hawks, really started to pick it up. And Brett Gabbert, he picked apart this Ohio defense last time. So I just see more avenues to success for Miami, Ohio. It's a low total, so maybe this game gets a little hairy. Maybe you want to take the money line, but we're giving out spreads. So I'll lay inside of a field goal with Miami, Ohio. I think that this is the clearly better team. Ohio, great story, but I just think they're up against this Red Hawks team.
No, I think you're on the right side. Like, I think just talent-wise, I just trust Miami, Ohio, and what they're able to do. I think they're able to win in more ways, frankly. And shouts to the MAC for finally getting the best coaching matchup in there because I've long held the opinion that Jason Candle is one of the most overrated coaches in America. So shouts to Chuck Martin and Tim Albin for getting their teams in here because I think those are the 2 actual best coaches in the MAC.
Yeah, I just think the Red Hawks are on a bit of a tear here. I mean, you look, last week they go to Bowling Green. They handle business, winner into the MAC championship game, and shut down Northern Illinois as well the week prior to that. 2 run-heavy offenses. So I do wonder if Ohio, who's only based around the run, is this just a really bad matchup for them?
Yeah.
All credit to the Bobcats, though, because they were supposed to be full rebuild. They've been awesome this season, but I think the Red Hawks get it done. All right, let's move on to the 4 power conference matchups here. Some of the big heavy hitters that are going to have college football playoff implications. We start in Jerry World for the Big 12 title game. Arizona State, Iowa State. Arizona State laying 2.5, total of 50 and a half, we'll call it. Big news going into this one. Obviously, big matchup, but Jordan Tyson, star receiver for Arizona State, going to miss this game and the foreseeable future with a shoulder injury. Clearly the top target for Sam Levitt and Kenny Dillingham's offense. Cody, do you think that's going to impact this game at all?
Not a whole lot on the Arizona State offense. Not as much as I thought it was going to. I'm going the Arizona State team total over 25.5 still. Tempe kids, first off, chiming in. Matt Campbell overrated in big games. I agree with that. I also think Iowa State is overrated in general this year. The Cyclones had the worst in-conference strength of schedule in the Big 12 this year, which probably lends itself to why they're in the Big 12 championship game. And this defense, I think, is just built on a little bit of smoke and mirrors. They're the 5th worst tackling grade according to PFF in the conference, and the 2nd worst run defense grade, 84th in the country in defensive success rate against the run this year. Without Jordan Tyson, I think we see a heavy dose of Levitt in the run game, but I also think like I mentioned in the underdog read, I think we see Cam Scatterbo have a really big game in this one, and they just lean on him. The other thing that I really come down to is when you have a defense that has not been tackling well, has not defended the run well, and you're going up against an offensive mind like Kenny Dillingham, who seems to really be in his bag right now, I just think that Arizona State is able to score. I don't trust this Arizona State defense as much as I want to, so that's why I'm leaning the team total side as opposed to just taking Arizona State. But I do think Arizona State has no real problem scoring, even without Tyson. I don't think they need to throw the ball too much in this game, quite frankly.
Yeah, this is setting up for an Arizona State win, in my opinion. Obviously, you'd like to have your top target. Tyson's a stud also.
Oh, yeah.
But where I come down, and it's what you were hinting at, Iowa State outside the top 100 in yards per carry allowed, over 5 yards per carry. That's a pretty jarring look when you have Cam Scatterbo, and also a capable, not that he's taken off so much, he also battled an injury during the year, but Sam Levitt's a capable runner as well. Yeah. So don't sleep on the quarterback run game in this game. I think Arizona State could just plow their way through up and down the field. Meanwhile, you want to talk about big plays championship game. Sam Levitt, 3 turnover-worthy plays all season, and Kenny Dillingham has him playing really clean football. This Iowa State team, they're not consistent. They're up and down. They thrive off explosive plays, and they could hit a few with Noel and Higgins at receiver.
Oh, yeah.
But Rocco Becht, 18 turnover-worthy plays this season. He has a big arm, but he also throws the ball into harm's way a lot. Arizona State, top 25 in success rate. So they're staying ahead of schedule. They're moving the chains. They're, being in advantageous situations on the field. Iowa State, outside the top 90 in that. So it's really boom or bust. So I think in a game like this, I'm going to trust the more reliable offense with a sturdy defense. And I think that this matchup sets up really nicely for Arizona State. Sam Kim, though, in the chat, he says, Iowa State is more believable to me than Arizona State. Hard to see either team making noise in the playoffs. I don't know if either team's going to make noise in the playoffs or anything like that, but just in this one game, you look at Iowa State, you brought up strength of schedule. Let's just go through their last month. Lose to Texas Tech, get kind of handled by Kansas, escape Utah on the road, and then what was a pretty fraudulent win against Kansas State. They had a less than 50 post-game win expectancy. Meanwhile, Arizona State has been running amok in this conference basically for the better part of a month. Their only loss, there are only two losses. One was a turnover-filled game against Texas Tech, and then the other, Leavitt missed against Cincinnati on the road, and Arizona State missed like 5 field goals that Kenny Dillingham was like, all right, we're holding open tryouts for kicker. So I like Arizona State in this game. I think they control the game flow, and I think they get out of here with the Big 12 title.
No, and I lean that side as well. Like, everything I said was obviously very disparaging to the Iowa State Cyclones. So, like, I lean that side. But I do like the explosive playability of this passing game. And, like, yes, Arizona State has been advantageous in terms of what their defense has been able to do. But, like, in terms of coverage ability, like, I don't know how well they're going to be able to stick with Noel and Higgins in this game. So I'm staying away from a side, but I lean your side for sure.
Yeah, we move on to the SEC championship game, 4:00 on ABC. Texas and Georgia renew pleasantries in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Pseudo home game for Georgia, but Texas is the small favorite, laying 2.5, total of 48.5. Cody, what are your thoughts here on the SEC championship game? 49.5 is the total, sorry.
To quote Michael Scott, no question about it, I'm ready to get hurt again. Give me Texas minus 2.5. I took Texas in the first matchup between these two. Didn't work out quite well for me, but I like them in the rematch. Two things stand out to me. First, I think Sark, having played Texas once, I think that's advantage Texas. I think having the game plan and knowing what he needs to be able to fix and what mistakes to overcome, I think that's advantageous to them. The other thing that really stands out to me with Texas in terms of being in a better position in this matchup, you look at the last 2 weeks, Quintravion Wisner has really come on and given Texas a run game that they've lacked for most of the season. In the past 2 weeks, he has 158 and 186 yards, and that's against Arkansas, which, say what you will about Arkansas, but also Texas A&M's defensive front. Putting up a 186 on Texas A&M, that means something to me. That means this Texas offensive line is blocking better in the trenches, is playing more consistently than they did in that Georgia game where they kind of got overwhelmed and they really didn't have an answer offensively. I think that the flip side of that, Beck has been playing a lot better. Beck looks like the quarterback that we were championing early in the season, coming into the season. He's finally gotten back to that form. I cannot get the Ole Miss game out of my head. The Ole Miss game where Ole Miss was sending pressure and made Beck look just completely lost. I think Texas' defensive front has that ability. I think we frankly saw it in the first game. Beck threw 3 interceptions in that game. Beck played really poorly in that first matchup. Didn't matter because Trevor Etienne ended up with 3 rushing scores. They were able to keep moving the ball. But I think that Georgia's receivers, I think, are going to have a really hard time separating in this matchup because I don't think they have difference makers in that receiving core. Texas is one of the best coverage teams in the country. The other thing I come down looking at that first matchup and what I think is going to be different than this one, I talked about Sark limiting some of the mistakes that killed them the last time. Only one of Georgia's scoring drives in that first matchup was over 35 yards. Texas mistakes set up Georgia to be able to capitalize offensively. I don't trust Georgia's defensive consistency. I don't trust the receiving weapons, and I think Texas is going to be able to get here and get the job done this time around.
Yeah, I also like Texas. I went a little different, though. I took Texas in the first half.
That's savvy. I like that a lot.
So, I go back and forth. I actually just think Texas is going to cover the game, and I'll explain why in a second. But you got Steve Sarkisian's script. We've seen all season. Outside the Georgia game was an aberration from the norm for Texas. Texas they've been one of the best first half teams in the country. They're averaging over 21 points per game this season in the first half, top 10. Georgia, only 11 points per game on average. That's 79th in the country. So right around like a little below national average. So Georgia's been a really slow starting team. And I'm getting Steve Sarkisian kind of dictating the script here against Mike Bobo. So I see a bit of an edge there.
Yeah.
I also think, and this is why I agree with your play in general, and I'm going to tie a bow on it. I'm going to weave this in nicely, but I really think this Quinn Ewers ankle injury is the best thing to happen to Texas's national championship odds.
Yeah.
Because we saw on Texas's first scoring play against A&M, they deployed Arch Manning in a run package, a design run play, a quarterback keeper. The one thing Georgia struggled with is design quarterback runs. They couldn't stop Jalen Milroe. They couldn't stop Haynes King. And even Jackson Dart, who was on a bad ankle. So I think Steve Sarkisian is going to use Arch Manning again in a timely manner in this game to give Georgia different looks, keep their defense out of sync. So I think that Georgia might dip into that bag a little bit more in this game, because if you remember the first game, Steve Sarkisian went to Arch Manning during the middle of that game when it was kind of snowballing, and he was just completely overwhelmed. That's like a brutal situation. If you bring him in where the score is kind of setting up a little nicely, maybe in a neutral game state, maybe you could unlock a little bit with his legs there. So I think you see Texas get off to a hot start here in the scripted portion of the game. And also part of me wonders, because we were talking about it earlier about Georgia, if they do get smoked. And look, Georgia's a great team. They might win this game outright. They're less than a field goal underdog. I do wonder if, let's just say Georgia gets out to or Georgia digs himself an early hole and it just doesn't get going. Are they going to go all in? They just went 8 overtimes. Are they going to risk injury? Or is it, hey, we've done enough to the committee. We're not going to, like, some of these games might not have the second half rallies that we're used to see in some of these all-in conference championship games.
No, I'm 100% with you. And I also think that, Lane Kiffin has been the vocal one about, do you really want to play in the SEC championship and in these types of things, kind of talking about like the things that analysts talk about and other coaches. But you can't tell me that Kirby Smart isn't sitting there thinking, I might not mind having the 6th seed and being able to play either the G5 champion or Clemson again, or, like the lowest ranked at-large bid in that spot, and then get to play the 3 or 4 seed in the next round, and also have the motivational factor of you boys couldn't even win the SEC. Like, that's something that I think you have to think about here. Like, if Texas doesn't, I think the thing that really stands out to me about that first game is what you described. Like, it is an aberration, but I also think it's just like everything that could go wrong for Texas went wrong. Yeah. And like when they put Arch Manning in that game, like they were already on their heels. They might have already been on their ass, frankly. Like they were just completely like mowed over by that point. So like if Texas is able to control the script more often than not, then like we saw it last week with Texas. Texas' game plan against Texas A&M was, okay, we're going to script it out and then we're going to sit on it. We're just going to sit on it. And if they sit on it, I don't think Georgia has enough difference makers to make up that difference.
I agree. The Georgia passing game, outside, not even just back, just the receivers are becoming a serious issue. Sam Kim, he was talking as we were talking about our game, given our handicap. He said Texas is the easy pick, but if Georgia beats them again, ... But then he says, I believe about Georgia potentially, again, we're kind of laying at a certain game state, but laying down. Sam says, come on, Georgia's playing on the road up north. If they lose, maybe Georgia does need to win this game. Part of me thinks that Texas can get ahead early, and I just don't know if we're going to see a ferocious Georgia comeback like we saw against Alabama or against Georgia Tech when, yes, the stakes are high, but also part of it has to be an eye towards the future. This like isn't an all-in game anymore. Like last year against Alabama, all-in game. You lose, you're out. This one, you might not.
I don't think so. I really don't. I think the other thing, putting our Senate cap back on, excuse me, the ESPN, who has all the rights to the college football playoff, they are going to want to do right by the SEC. And putting the SEC championship loser not hosting a home game, like dropping them to being on the road in the first round, that's not going to make Greg Sankey very happy. And if I'm being a cynic about it, they want to make Greg Sankey happy.
Yeah. We move on now to the ACC championship game, which we already talked about the stakes of this one, potentially a play-in game to the college football playoff. SMU, a 2.5-point favorite against Clemson. SMU hasn't lost in about 2 months now. Clemson, they just lost last week to South Carolina. Cody, what are your thoughts on this one?
I think Clemson's not very good. I don't know what evidence we have to say that Clemson is good at this point. They played 6 games against bowl-eligible teams this year. They went 3-3 of those games. And those wins happened to come against NC State, who barely was bowl-eligible, Virginia Tech, barely bowl-eligible, and a Pitt team that at that point was starting to break. The injuries started to take its toll on Pitt. I'm going SMU minus 2.5, and I didn't really have to think very hard about it. SMU's dangerous offensively. You look back at last week and what Lenore Sellers was able to do with his legs. I think we see a lot of Kevin Jennings using his legs in this game because that caused Clemson a ton of problems. And I don't even think it has to be designed. I think just giving Kevin Jennings the freedom, hey, if the lane's there, take off. Because that's when Lenore Sellers was at his best against this Clemson defense last week. On the flip side of that, this SMU defense is perpetually underrated, in my opinion. I think it's been one of the better defensive teams in the ACC and, frankly, in the Power 4 as well. I think that specifically their ability to stop the run, they are third in EPA per rush allowed this season in the country. Clemson's offense really relies on that run game. Get Phil Moffitt going, get Cade Klubnik going. I think SMU's really able to put an end to that and put them in a lot of third and long situations, which I don't like Clemson's offense in. I think SMU wins this one pretty handily, frankly.
Yeah. I mentioned last week when we were talking Clemson, South Carolina. Clemson's built up this resume on beating up on some crappy teams. And when they face elite defensive lines for that matter, they've really struggled. I mentioned last week, they failed to average. So they played 3 elite defensive lines. They faced Georgia, Louisville, and Pitt. They failed to pick up more than 5 yards per play in every single game. That's a pretty abysmal mark. That's below the national average. Last week against South Carolina, who fits the bill of that, they did average 6 yards per play, which is good. But they had a negative EPA per play, so they really weren't all that explosive. Yeah. SMU is all about explosives. I think they could test this Clemson defense, and SMU's rush defense, like one of the best in the country. They allow less than 3 yards per play, like you were saying. I also think Phil Moffitt, some of the wear and tear might be taking its toll on him, averaging only 3 yards per carry, about 3 yards per carry the last 3 weeks. So I wonder if Moffitt's slowing down and too much pressure comes on Cade Klubnik. Offensive line still a big concern here. So I like SMU as well. I laid the 2.5 with you. Sam Kim saying he knows one thing. SMU is praying SMU wins. We spoke about that earlier during the college football playoff segment, but I'm totally with you. I think that SMU, sure, they're less battle tested, but at the same time, I wouldn't say Clemson's battle tested as much as they've just failed in battle.
They've lost a lot of battles for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So I think SMU, since going to Kevin Jennings, they've scored 28 points in every single game. Like, I wonder what the ceiling is for this Clemson offense against an SMU team that, while gettable, again, they're really elite on the defensive line, and that's been the issue for Clemson. So I think SMU can win this one. I think they lock up a spot in the college football playoff.
Love to hear it. Yeah, I mean, like, I just think that I would love to see. I probably should have done this research, and maybe you have it in front of you because you just brought up, they averaged 6 yards a play last week. What was that split between the first half and second half, if you possibly have that? Because Clemson had a good game plan, a good script coming out in the first half, but I felt like South Carolina really negated everything they were trying to do in the second half.
So I have the drives up, so I don't know the actual total, but I could talk through it. So they opened the second half with an 11-play, 75-yard touchdown drive. After that, they had a fumble. After that, they had a punt, and an interception. So, let me do the math really quick. So after the 75-yard touchdown drive that started the half, they had 46, 54, 58, and 58 and 57. What is that? 105? 115?
Yeah.
115.
Yeah.
So they had 115 yards on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 drives. So about 20-ish yards per drive.
Yeah, and that's more what I saw outside of the opening script of that game. And I have a heart. I just do not trust this Clemson team at all.
Yeah, and Sam points out Clemson wins a close game and makes the committee have an impossible decision in front of them. Yeah, it's someone's going to be getting screwed. We move on now to the Big Ten championship game. Oregon tries to complete an undefeated season in their first season in the Big Ten against Penn State, the surprise entrant into the Big Ten title game after Oregon State lays an absolute egg against Michigan. I said Oregon State, Ohio State. Cody, what are your thoughts in the Big Ten championship game?
Well, Reed, I'm going to give you a little brief history lesson on
Please.
Penn State playing against ranked opponents over the past 2 seasons. Against Ohio State this year, it was a 20-13 loss. And against Illinois this year, it was a 21-7 win. Against Michigan last year, it was a 24-15 loss. Against Ohio State last year, it was a 20-12 loss. And against Iowa last year, it was a 31-0 win. Do you want to know what all of those things have in common, Reed?
It's less than 50 points.
That's correct. It is under 49.5, which is where I'm going for this game. We know big game James Franklin loves to get conservative. And the one thing that scares me is we have the flip side of the coin on the opposite sideline with Dan Lanning, who does not have a conservative bone in his entire body. He's going to go for it, and he's going to risk it to get the biscuit. But I think
finish your thought. I interrupted.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I wonder, is Lanning going to be conservative in this game?
It's possible. It's entirely possible.
Because
it's outside of his character. I will say that. But I mean, I think it makes sense to be.
So why I think he might be conservative is, okay, so he went for it a lot against like Washington last year, and he came up just snake eyes every time, which it happens. Like that's what you do when you go for it on 4th down every time. Did a lot against Ohio State. But like, to me, those were games like, all right, I need to score. I need the ball. I need to find more answers against this really potent offense. But that's not Penn State. So I almost wonder if he's going to lean on his defense, maybe at least early in the game. So I just wonder, like, part of me thinks like, no, we're actually going to see a conservative Dan Lanning on these 4th downs. Obviously situations come up in the game and you figure it out as you go, but like 4th and 1 at your own 35, like maybe that one's more of a punt than trying to like give Penn State a short field, make them drive the length of the field.
No, and I think that I think that's definitely in the cards. And I also think like if Dan Lanning's smart, he looks at that Ohio State game where Penn State did not score an offensive touchdown. Their one score came on a pick 6. Limit your opportunity for mistakes. Penn State's defense is the best thing they have going for them in this game. I do think Penn State's defense is able to slow down Dylan Gabriel. I do think they're able to slow down Jordan James, because I think that when you look at the size, length, and explosiveness of this Penn State defensive front, I think they cause Gabriel a lot of problems. We forget that Dylan Gabriel is a smaller quarterback, and like he's played extremely well, but when he gets pressured, he's a different player because he can't see the lanes quite as well. So like I think Penn State is able to slow them down. But again, I think the same thing's true on the opposite side of the ball. I don't think this Penn State offense has shown us anything that says they're going to be able to have success against this Oregon defense, especially with the way this Oregon defense has been playing of late. So like I think under is a pretty comfortable play for me. I would be surprised if this game got in the 40s with the way I see these defenses kind of ruling the day.
Yeah, I'm with you here. I took the under as well. So we have a lot of agreement across the board. Oregon hasn't been a super explosive team all year. They've been more methodical. They're outside the top, bottom half of the country in explosive pass and run rate. So I do think that we're not going to see fireworks here. And again, like I think Dan Lanning might be a little cautious in this game. I think he might try to avoid setting off a shootout in this one. You bring up a lot of great points about Penn State's lack of big playability and their ability to put points on the board. I think Oregon wants to grind this one out and win this one 24-17, 24-20, something like that. So I think we see a conservative game from both sides, of course, definitely on the James Franklin side. But ultimately, I also think that Penn State, the offense, their lack of just a game breaker on the outside, it's almost similar to like what Georgia lacks. Like this lacks a true guy, where obviously Georgia last year had Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey. Ohio State, for that matter, they have a Egbuka and a Jeremiah Smith. Oregon, they have a few of those guys. Tez Johnson got back last week from an injury, so we'll see how he does. Jordan James are really explosive, but Penn State, like when your most explosive threat is Tyler Warren, who's a tight end, I feel like Oregon's defense is too sophisticated to allow too many of those explosive plays. You know what I mean? So I think 100%. We see a defensive-minded affair here.
No, 100%. And I think, like, again, going back to the Penn State-Ohio State game, we looked at, when Penn State needed a play, they looked to Tyler Warren. You know who else knew that? Jim Knowles. And Jim Knowles absolutely shut it down. Like, I remember that with the 4th and goal play where they tried to force feed Warren and, like, he was triple covered. Like, they know what smart defensive minds, sophisticated defensive minds, defensive schemes, they know what's going to happen in this. I will say the one thing that does scare me a little bit is, like, yes, I understand all the metrics about Oregon. You go back to that Ohio State game against Oregon, Evan Stewart played a really big part in that, and I don't think that was coincidental. I think Evan Stewart is that explosive play threat on the outside, and I think we could see a little bit of a heavier usage of him. But again, with Dylan Gabriel being under pressure, I'm not sure he's able to get him the ball quite as much.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is going to be like quick passes, trying to offset that Penn State pass rush for sure. Great stuff, Cody. As always, breaking down the conference championship games, both the Power Four and the Group of Five. Before we get out of here, Cody, why don't you recap our picks?
Let's go, man. So I've got Marshall plus 5.5 in the Sun Belt Championship game. Big 12 Championship game, I've got Arizona State team total over 25.5. SEC Championship, give me Texas minus 2.5. ACC, give me SMU minus 2.5. And Big 10 Championship game, that's an under 49.5. And that closes us out.
There you go. And for me, I took Miami, Ohio minus 2.5 in the MAC title game. I took Arizona State minus 2.5 in the Big 12 title game. Laid it with Texas in the first half minus 0.5. Took SMU with Cody minus 2.5 in the ACC title game, and then the under 49.5 in the Big 10 championship game. Make sure to sign up with Underdog Fantasy using the promo code Stacking the Box. We will be back next week, same time, college football playoff preview, all the bracket fallout you want. Great time of year, a lot to get to. Cody, thanks as always, and enjoy the games this weekend.
We'll see you then.